Hi, friends! The garden has long since given all it can for this season. At the time of recording this footage in November, the annual veg plants had already withered away. The shrubs that will be with us again next year were already starting to look tired and cold. And most of the leaves on the lovely oak tree in the center of our yard had drifted away, leaving just a few lonely stragglers behind. The garden is done for now, and it's time to tuck her in for a few months of rest. First, let's get a few supplies from the shed. Greg lit a fire to burn brush and also so we can have a spot to warm up when the wind gets too chilly. Let's take a look at the herb garden and see what's ahead of us. The enormous tomato plant that was trellised on our siding is clearly ready to go. It had started to climb this elderberry shrub as well, so I start with some untangling before clipping the plant back at the base, leaving its roots in the ground to feed the soil organisms over the winter. The rest of the plant won't go to waste either. I take it back to the compost pile, trimming the viney lengths into shorter sections before adding it to the pile, which will make it easier to turn and quicker to break down into that beautiful black gold we use to dress our garden beds. Now that we've taken care of the tomato, let's turn our attention to the basil plants. They might not look like much, but these little brown pods hold some goodies for us. These plants went to seed before the cool weather took hold, and with just a little work, I'll have enough seeds from this handful of pods to grow as much basil as I could possibly want next year. I harvest some from each of this year's plants and set them aside to work on later. Now onto these mums. Normally, I'm a big proponent of leaving perennial remnants over the winter to provide seed and habitat for birds and insects over the cold season. But last year, I left these mums alone all winter, and they ended up smothering and killing the perennial herbs that I had planted around them. They also aren't native. They don't have big seed pods for birds like echinacea or native grasses do. So for all these reasons, I'm actually planning to remove these mums from this garden bed. They just take up too much space for not that much benefit. I'll tuck them somewhere else in the yard, but I'd like to replace them with something that has more benefits for us and the creatures that we share our yard with next year. So even though there's still some green foliage under here, I'm cutting them all the way back at the base. If they don't make it next year, it's not a big loss to me anyway. With the mums gone, I turn my attention to this oregano. This poor guy has already gotten a little out of hand as I have not been on top of pruning. It's looking very leggy and has a lot of sparse, long, weak stems. I cut back all the dead stems to the very base and then snipped the weaker looking stems back, cutting just above a growth point to encourage stronger basil growth next growing season. Before I keep working in the garden, I need to move our bird bath. It has served us and our feathered friends well over the warm season, but it's time to pack it away for the freezing months. This is one of my least favorite winter prep tasks, but it needs to be done. I rinse it thoroughly using the strongest pressure setting on our garden hose, and give it a little elbow grease as well with a stiff brush to remove dirt and buildup. Then it's off to the shed for winter. Greg spent this day fully cleaning out the shed to prep for winter, so it's a bit chaotic over here now, but wow, it looked so good and organized when he was done. On my way back from the shed, I also stopped to clip these peony branches back. Peonies tend to get fungal issues like powdery mildew in the fall, so I removed plant remnants and burned them to try and prevent disease carryover from year to year. Now it's back to the herb garden. I removed these sad remnants of our pepper plants, again cutting back at ground level and leaving the roots to decompose in the soil. Then it's time to do some weeding. I wasn't too obsessive about this. It was cold, and weeding is not a fun job when it's chilly, and I also don't mind leaving a few extra roots in the ground over the cold season for weeds that aren't aggressive. However, we have invasive weeds that I definitely want to remove instead of letting them take hold for several months. Maintaining our garden is a constant battle with invasives like creeping Charlie, morning glory, and crabgrass, and it's always better to try to stay ahead of it than to deal with it after they've choked out native or intentionally placed plants. After taking quite a few trips with weeds to the compost pile, I'm going to bring some of our finished compost back to the garden. This metal tub has all of our finished sifted compost. This is what we use to top dress our garden beds. After bringing compost back to the garden, I spread it as a light layer in this bed. I'm using this as a soil amendment, not a mulch in this scenario, so it doesn't have to be a thick layer. For the corners where we already have a lot of dried leaves piling up, I just move them around and place compost underneath. Soil doesn't want to be naked, so I tuck her in with a leafy blanket. While gardening can be a lot of work, sometimes we make unnecessary work for ourselves, trying to push against nature instead of working with her. Instead of spending hours bagging leaves, what better way to store them over the winter than in the garden, keeping our soil protected and providing a cozy winter home for bumblebees and fireflies. When I cultivate a garden, I'm trying to create a space that's pleasing and productive, but I'm also working within a much larger system. One that isn't about me, whose priority isn't neatness or aesthetics. Respecting and caring for the plants, creatures, and organisms in that system is always my guiding principle when gardening, not trying to tame it or make it fit into an aesthetic box at the expense of those I share it with. And that means that sometimes, most of the time, my garden is messy. And I think that relinquishing that neatness can be really beautiful. As we head into January, a time of resolutions, diet culture, and immense pressure to hustle and fix everything in our lives overnight. May we take a lesson from nature. She's resetting too, but her preparation for productivity starts with lots of rest and a little messiness. From my garden to yours, wishing you a very happy and healthy new year. Until next time.